the Supreme Court decided to leave in place a lower court decision banning emergency abortions in Texas. As we all know, this is going to continue to affect millions of people because the laws are so vague. But there's an origin to this, and it's a ghost written letter that was written in the 1860s. The reason why we have this mindset about abortions is not from where you're thinking. It's from one letter, ghost written by a man who claimed it was from the president of the American Medical Association. And in that letter, he claimed that the American Medical Association was against abortions. So it created what was called a physician's crusade against abortions. Let's get started and learn something new. In this book, When Abortion Was a Crime, the author takes information from the National Library of Medicine and various sources from the American Medical Association that talked in detail about abortions. And from about the 1600s to the 1900s, abortions was a common practice. People from middle class, and upper class would get these abortions done, including married women. NPR did an interview a couple of years ago with authors who talked about the history and have written books about the history of abortions. And in those books, they talked about the fact that most of these abortions were done by midwives, and that at that time, women did not go to male physicians to get their nether regions looked at or treated or anything like that. You went to midwives, you went to women, because that's who I'm going to go to. Now, the midwives did not do all of this stuff in hiding. They advertised their herbal remedies, they advertised their procedures for abortions. It wasn't a hidden thing. Upper class women did it, upper class women did it, married, single, everybody could get this health care. It was not something that was shamed or frowned upon. Now, the reason why the doctors got in the mix of all of this is because during that time, the 1860s, the American Medical Association was not taken seriously. I forgot to include the most important part. They could get abortions up until they felt what was called a quickening. And the quickening was basically when you felt the baby move. That's when you could no longer get abortion. Now back to the American Medical Association and why they were not taken seriously. Now in this interview, one of the authors says, despite their best efforts, the AMA wasn't having much luck convincing people to take them seriously. And the editor of the Cincinnati Medical Observer describes physicians as a body of jealous, quarrelsome men whose chief delight is the annoyance and ridicule of each other. And along came that one man who wrote that ghost letter. His name was Horatio Storer. And in the 1850s, the American Medical Association was desperate for ideas on how to make their profession more respectable. And Storer set his sights on abortion. I forgot to include something else that was interesting. During that time, the women that were performing these abortions did not refer to them as abortions. They called it the restoring of the menses, aka trying to get your period again. So here's the part that I really need y'all to listen to. Please, this is where y'all gonna learn something new. So one of the authors said, so I think one thing that people misunderstand about the opposition to abortion is that people assume that there's always been a vibrant religious or moral opposition to abortion. And that, in fact, that's actually relatively recent. It's not something rooted in ancient history. And we can thank or not thank this one man, Horatio. That's where he comes in. He coined the term alive at the moment of conception. Horatio's trifling butt comes along and he ghost wrote a letter from the president of the American Medical Association. So it looked like it was coming from the president. But Horatio was actually the one who wrote it, saying that the AMA opposes abortion, and he used the language of morality. The letter was pivotal to what historians call the physician's crusade against abortion, and Storer was making a few key arguments for why abortion should be illegal across the country. First, he introduced a new idea. The child is alive from the moment of conception. So I don't want this video to be like 15 minutes long, so I'm going to link this article in the comments. Please go read it. I promise you're going to learn something new. Now, this is the part, that's full circle, that life began at conception. Remember, up until now, people generally agreed that life began when a woman could actually feel life move inside her at quickening. But that wasn't enough for Horatio. He campaigned on a moral argument that also tapped into the racial fears of the moment. Fears that would eventually inspire a pseudoscientific field of racial improvement and planned breeding of the population, because elite Protestant white women were often the ones going to get abortion. After Horatio wrote that letter pretending to be the president of the American Medical Association, he took it a step further. He started writing books, speeches, articles, going around the country, making speeches, giving his view on how abortions should be and how they shouldn't happen, and the fact that women should also get ovarectomies because they're too loud, they're too shrewd, they're not willing to have babies anymore, all of that kind of stuff. Now he took it even a step further and partnered with this man whose last name was Comstock. Now Comstock said, we got to get to the streets. We got to start targeting these midwives who are helping these women get these smortions because we don't want them to do that anymore. So they targeted a woman named Madame Restel. Now Madame Restel was not only helping with smortions, she was helping with all kinds of reproductive health because that's what made sense back in the day to women. Why would I go to a man for reproductive help? Help. Now, in 1878, Comstock decides to go to her business and pretend that he's a married man seeking a mortion for his wife who already had too many children and wasn't in good enough health to birth another. She sold him some pills and he was on his way. The next day, Comstock returned with a police officer who arrested Restel. And as always, Restel went to the press. She went to the press. She was like, oh, no, y'all not going to try to embarrass me and vilify me. She said, he's in this nasty detective business. There are a number of little doctors who are in the same business behind him. They think if they can get me in trouble and out of the way, they can make a fortune. If the public are determined to push this matter, they will have a good laugh when they learn the nature of the terrible items of the preventative prescriptions. Of course, if there's a trial, it will all come out. But unfortunately, there was no trial. She was so distressed about this, so confused as to why they were targeting her after this practice had been done for hundreds of years by midwives and women. And on the morning of the day she was supposed to appear in court, one of her chambermaids walked into her bathroom to find her unalived in the bathtub. She had her own wrists. I hope you learned something new.